Lake County Sheriff's Office detectives Ken Adams and Al Gustler heard the call come into the radio room.
I went in and called my comm center, and they advised me they weren't sure what they had, but there were some bodies. So I went ahead and responded to the scene. The deputies had already secured the residence, making sure nobody else was there and that everything was safe at that time. After I spoke with the deputies, I immediately began an interview with Jennifer Wendorf, the daughter of the victims.
A shaken Jennifer told detectives that her parents' Ford Explorer was missing, and so was her sister, Heather.
We didn't know if Heather had been possibly murdered or if she had been kidnapped or what the case was for sure. And after interviewing Jennifer, we entered the residence. The first victim we saw was the father lying on the couch. His head and face was in very bad condition. And just a quick glance at that and the way this gentleman was lying, it appeared that he never knew what hit him.
Lying near Richard Wendorf was the bludgeoned body of his wife, Naoma. Unlike her husband, there were clear signs that Naoma put up a fight. Defensive wounds were observed on the victim's body.
On examining the bodies closer, you could tell that the injuries were severe. It was what we call overkill. Somebody that wanted to do more than just quiet somebody. The master bedroom had been ransacked. There was jewelry and papers, drawers open, and they were strewn all over, which at first look gave the appearance of a possible robbery.
Detectives Ken Adams and Al Gustler waited outside for the crime scene to be processed. As a crowd gathered, a witness stepped forward.
Heather's friend arrived on the scene with her mother, and she advised me that, yes, they were both going to run away with a fellow named Rod Ferrell. And that with Rod, there were three others that she really didn't know, but she was able to give us their names.
According to the witness, Heather's friend, Rod Ferrell, had moved to Kentucky a year earlier. There, he met up with friends Scott Anderson, Dana Cooper, and Charity Cassie. The four had formed a bizarre cult, and they had traveled to Florida to make Heather the newest member.
Anything else you could tell me?
They're vampires.
And Janine told us that there's a thing in their group, they called themselves vampires, and there's such a thing as crossing over. They will take a new member that wants to be a vampire. The leader of the clan will take this member, and then they will split their arms and suck each other's blood. And when Heather had left school Monday afternoon, they had proceeded to a cemetery where Rod had crossed Heather over to become, quote, a vampire.
Detectives faced a troubling question. Was Heather Wendorf a blameless victim or part of a murderous band of teenagers obsessed with the occult? Either way, one thing was certain. Investigators had to find her before more innocent blood was shed. Following up on their strongest lead, detectives issued an all-points bulletin to local police agencies for the Wendorf stolen Ford Explorer. The next day, they got a hit.
After we received a call from Seminole County, a neighboring county, that they had recovered a red car, abandoned, that was bearing the tag that belonged on the Wendorf's Explorer.
Police identified the car's owner as Scott Anderson, a member of the vampire cult. They believed that he switched his license plate with those from the Wendorf's SUV. As the search for the teenagers intensified, one of the runaway girls reached out.
The grandmother of Charity Cassie had received a call from Charity earlier that evening.
Hello? Hi, Granny. It's Charity.
Charity had called her asking if she knew where her mother was.
Tell me when you're coming home, please. Just let her know that I called.
But when the grandmother asked Charity where she was, the teen abruptly hung up. The grandmother immediately called police.
She told me that she did not get a phone number from Charity, but we continued to talk for a few minutes, and then she let a gasp out and said that she had a strange number on her caller ID, at which time she read it back to me, and I checked the area code, and it came back to Baton Rouge, Louisiana area.
Ken Adams contacted a homicide detective at the Baton Rouge Police Department and gave him the phone number.
said that it would come from a payphone down by the river.
How long ago did they leave?
I asked him about motels in the area and suggested that they check them for our vehicle.
Patrol units began canvassing the motels in the area surrounding the phone call's origin. Within 15 minutes, their search paid off.
Dispatch of a Ford Explorer with license plate number 2, Charlie X.
Scott Anderson, Dana Cooper, Charity Cassie, Rod Ferrell, and Heather Wendorf were all arrested. They were transported to the Baton Rouge police station. Detective Al Gustler immediately traveled to Baton Rouge, where he conducted interviews with all 5 suspects. First up was 15-year-old Charity Cassie.
I said, why are you questioning me? I didn't do anything.
Well, that's what we're here to find out. Charity Cassie denied everything, having any knowledge of anything, and so forth.
Because I don't want to lose Rod, and I don't want to get in trouble with all this stuff because I didn't.
He's not gonna hurt you, okay?
No, I'm not scared of him. I'm just scared of what's gonna happen to him. You gotta realize I love Rod more than anything. And if anything happened to him, it's
You're not making it any worse for him, okay?
Detectives then turned to Dana Cooper, who reluctantly began to give details about the night of the murder.
When we left Kentucky, it was me, Charity, Rod, and Scott. I was the one that paid for the trip down to Florida. We parked a ways from the residence.
Dana claimed that after Heather got in the car, Rod Ferrell and Scott Anderson, without explanation, headed for the Wendorf home. The next interview was with Scott Anderson.
Other than yourself and Rod, which one in the group was in the house with you?
Just me, Ron. How did you plan on killing him?
With sticks, but then while we were in the garage, she found the crowbar.
So they found the crowbar in the garage. Scott was supposed to kill the mother, and Rod Ferrell was going to kill the father. He went through the washing room area, where then he entered the family room and saw Dad, and that's where the whole thing began.
What did you go up there for?
I thought I'd be able to do something, but
Do something? What?
like help him kill him.
When we got to Mr. Ferrell came in, and we basically let Rod roll. He wanted to talk, almost to a point of being a braggart as to what had happened.
Okay. Went into the house. My mother was taking a shower. I was asleep on the couch, so I took the liberty of rummaging through the house and getting something to drink because I was thirsty.
Okay.
And Scott was following right behind me like a little lost puppy. Before my mother got out of the shower, went over to her dad and smacked the out of me until he finally quit breathing.
Rod went on to brag about what he did.
What do you want?
Come on, man, do it. Come on, hit her! Hit her!
He said when they got inside, after he killed the father, Scott froze up, so he had to kill the mother. Heather Wendorf was next. Denied everything.
No matter how big your part was or how small it was, you're the only one that can fill in that puzzle for us. And right now, it sounds like you don't want to. For whatever reason it may be.
I remember telling him flat out, don't even go near my parents.
Why would you tell him not even to go near your parents?
Because he asked me not too long ago if I wanted my parents dead or alive, and I said straight out I wanted them alive.
Heather's interview was unclear. Was she an active member of the blood-drinking cult or an unwilling victim? Following several extradition hearings, Rod Ferrell and the other suspects were transported back to Florida. Even though the videotape statements seemed to be incriminating, authorities were in for a surprise. Not all of the vampire cult members would stand trial.
The vampire cult killers were finally in custody. Now it was up to a Florida grand jury to decide if Heather Wendorf was a willing participant in the murders of her parents.
Following their extradition, the 5 separate cases were passed on to State Attorney Brad King.
In the state of Florida, a capital crime, a death penalty offense, first-degree murder, can only be charged by our grand jury, which is a group, at that time it was 18 citizens of the county, who gathered together, heard the evidence in absolute secrecy, and made the determination of, is there enough evidence to hold this person for this crime?
The grand jury charged Scott Anderson with first-degree murder, as well as with armed robbery and burglary. He pled guilty and was sentenced to life in prison. Charity Cassie was charged with armed robbery, armed burglary, and third-degree murder. She pled guilty and was sentenced to 10.5 years in prison. Dana Cooper, the only legal adult in the group, was also charged with armed robbery, armed burglary, and third-degree murder. She too pled guilty and received a 17.5-year prison sentence. Heather Wendorf's case would turn out to be not as clear-cut as the others.
We had no physical evidence. All we had was that Heather had planned to run away and that they were all caught together in Louisiana. So all of those things combined, the grand jury said that given everything that they had heard, there was no longer reason to believe that she was involved in the deaths.
Heather, come here, Heather! Can you help?
All charges against Heather Wendorf were dropped, and she was released.
Heather!
Rod Ferrell was charged with armed burglary, armed robbery, and 2 counts of first-degree murder. He alone decided to go to trial.
I had just stood up to begin my opening statement and had, I think, uttered 1 sentence of the first paragraph when Mr. Ferrell's defense counsel stood up and got the judge's attention and said, "Your Honor, can we approach the bench?" Rod Ferrell's defense counsel said, "Judge, I think my client intends to enter a plea of guilty to the charges, but we need time to talk to him."
Bailiff, remove the jurors.
So the judge said, "Okay, y'all can talk about it, decide what you're going to do." And actually, that process went on for most all of the morning. They came out to talk to me to find out if I would waive the death penalty, and I told them no, I wouldn't.
Rod Ferrell agreed to plead guilty, but there would still be a trial. Only now, the jury would decide whether the vampire cult killer would live or die. At 16, Ferrell would become one of the youngest defendants ever to face the possibility of execution. The defense claimed that Rod Ferrell had suffered through years of painful abuse and should not be held accountable for his actions as an adult. His mother testified on the stand that she was incapable of raising her son and had failed to provide him with a stable home.
The defense in the penalty phase was the fact that society and government failed Rod Ferrell, failed to give him help for his problems. What I did was simply point the jury back to look at what Rod Ferrell did and hold him accountable for it.
But after she lunched me, I just took the crowbar and kept stabbing into her skull. Whenever she fell down, I just continually beat her. That pissed me off. That's how I got these.
He talks about it on the tape, as if it's just another day at the store. And literally then talks about feeling the rush and the surge of energy at having taken a human life. And in my mind, those things dictated that society had an obligation to remove him from us forever.
The jury retired to carefully deliberate the fate of Rod Ferrell and to decide if his troubled childhood was enough reason to spare his life. After deliberating for more than 4 hours, the jury recommended that Rod Ferrell pay the ultimate price for his heinous crimes.
Rod Ferrell, I uphold the jury's recommendation that you be sentenced to death.
It boggles my mind how somebody at that age can get so depraved and lose so much control at one time and take out so much anger on two people with the brutality of what he did, and seem to enjoy it.
Rod Ferrell is currently on death row at the Union Correctional Institute.